now.
Hello from Open Ed. We're so excited to have everybody here. My name is Tanya Spilovoy. You might know me from greatest OER hits like the Spark Open Education Leadership Program, the National Council for Open Educational Resources at the Regional Compacts, and a variety of other OER fanatic type activities. I'm so excited to be in person at the first OER conference since 2019. So we're very excited about it, except for our brief hiatus in the virtual land in the last few years. So to make a quick acknowledgement, there are lots of other people who are behind the scenes and working very hard to make this conference happen. I'd like to just give a shout out to Christina Ryman Murphy and Laura Robert Rivera. So they are here assisting and making all this happen in a hybrid context. I serve on the board, and there's a lot going on in the background, and we're so pleased that we can make this all happen. Today, we're going to talk about a very unique and new topic to open education that really hasn't been explored a lot in the field. And so a lot of these new ideas are actually very new. To introduce myself, I'm currently working at the Association of Governing Boards for Universities and Colleges. And then I'll have Jeff Seaman introduce himself and Lisa Petrides as well. And we'll talk about this new concept of how to engage governing boards and trustees in the high-level decisions around OER. First of all, what is a trustee? So probably a lot of you might not think about these folks that are functioning at a very, very high level. And so the legal term for a trustee in its broadest sense, according to Wikipedia, is a synonym for anyone in a position of trust. And so that can refer to any individual who holds property, authority, or a position of trust or responsibility for the benefit of another. That's a very important and responsible position. So the Association of Governing Boards is the place where universities and colleges come to learn about how to be a good trustee and how to work as a board. They really have a vision to stand for excellence in all board governance and responsibility of trusteeship. The mission is to advance higher education as a public good, preparing college, university, and foundation governing boards to fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities and exemplify the highest ideals of trusteeship. And the values are innovation, inclusivity, collaboration, integrity, service, and respect. So these are all wonderful things that we should aspire to in our daily lives, and also something that we bring to boards and trustees. So to give you a sense of who AGB serves, there are 2,000 institutions, systems, and foundations that are members of AGB. That means there's more than 40,000 individual board members in addition to those 2,000, and our membership boards oversee over 10 million students. Your institutions might be a member of AGB, and that would be something good to check out. So there's a pretty big distinction between corporate boards and higher education boards and what their functions are. And you've probably heard, like you say the board of some big corporation made a decision, and they're making decisions in a different way and with a different mindset than public colleges and university boards do. Public corporations' primary job is to maximize shareholder value. And they're also mostly beholden to stakeholders, mostly the shareholders. And their performance metrics that they're concerned about are primarily financial. Some of that is similar to public college and university boards and trustees. However, they have a completely different mission where they are there to serve the educational and public service mission of the institution itself, or in some cases, the system. Their stakeholders are students, faculty, staff, alumni, and lawmakers and public. So that's actually a much broader group of stakeholders than just shareholders for a particular company. They have to serve a lot of different people and interests as they're making decisions. And the performance metrics are very broad, as you know, when we're talking about the health of an institution or the health of a system. Trustees have a lot of responsibility and they're asked to do a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. So there are different ways that boards are comprised. There's a lot of different considerations. So there's variety among different states and systems and institutions, including the difference between a public and a private institution, how boards are appointed or they're elected, or how long their terms are. There's all kinds of variety. So boards are different in their makeup, the size, the skill set of the people who are serving, their backgrounds and experiences. There's also a difference sometimes in the committee structure, like what they've decided to separate and focus on in their different board structure and committees. And then they also have different bylaws and rules governing their decisions around executive session. And a very, very important part of a trustee or a board structure is the staff. So these people support the board, prepare all the documents, make sure things are publicly available, make sure that the minutes are kept. The board staff are some of the most essential people and important to the board's success. And then boards often have different priorities, and they also want different information from the management. And when I say management, it's basically president, senior staff, right? So I love AGB for these things because this really spoke to me as a human in addition to my work in higher education. But they really take a responsible approach to people's principles for trusteeship for the actual individual human, not the board as a whole, but people. Lead by example. Understand what governance is. Think strategically. And when you look at all these principles and how they're divided out, it's a lot of just responsibility of being a really great person. These slides that I'm presenting belong to AGB, so I didn't make them up myself, and these are part of what they do every day. So be an ambassador for your institution and higher education. Respect the difference between the board's role and the administrator's role, right? So they're not the president. They have a completely different role than the board and the staff and the president. And embrace the full scope of your responsibilities. One of the ones that I think is really fascinating under lead by example is you are supposed to think independently, but also once a decision has been made with the board, you move forward collectively. So there can be a lot of discussion on the board, differences of opinion, variety, and diversity of thought. But when you've decided and voted, everybody moves forward as a whole voice. You're welcome to take a look at these later and really think about them yourself. I think they're great to adopt as a human in addition to any kind of service work that you're doing. So one of the interesting things is we do a survey of boards because we have access to so many different boards. And if you look board members by age, so I'm just going to show you some diversity slides. It's in public, independent, and foundation boards. The majority of people are between 50 and 69 years old. You can see kind of on the fringes that there are 70 and older, and also under 30 is a very minority of people, probably student trustees or others that were appointed. But it's a pretty median and similar age group throughout all different types of boards. This is a area that needs work. AGB is really focused on diversifying the board. They're very dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the percentage of women on the board, if you look at the different types, public, independent, and the gender breakdown, these are people who have self-identified in these groups, but the dominant is like 36% female and 63% male. So that is an area that AGB is, and everyone in public higher ed needs to think about. And then a very similar picture for board member ethnicity and race. You can see the total minorities are in one category of this slide. So in public, independent, and foundation boards, and this includes all different types of institutions, 64.7% up to 83.8% are white non-Hispanic. There's also a slide I forgot to add in here, but it says, like what percentage of trustees contribute large pots of cash to the institution, and that's quite a large number. So you can kind of get a picture of who is a trustee, and it's predominantly, white, a certain age group, a certain gender, and also socioeconomic status that is making decisions for the institution on behalf of their responsibilities. So when you're thinking about engaging with this group of people, we're going to have a question in the chat. And Christina's going to put this in here. What would you like to say to your trustees, and what would you like them to know about OER? I'll be advancing the slides for Dr. Seaman next. So he is going to talk about the data. And please be ready with some ideas and answers when we get to the end.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome everyone. I'm talking to you from a hotel room in California, and wanted to spend a little bit of time just going over some stuff. I am Dr. Jeff Seaman. I am Director of Bayview Analytics. We've been doing a lot of work in OER for probably 15 years or so, and have also most recently been doing some survey work in terms of trustees and board members, as well as a particular topic I want to talk about today, which is the affordability issues confronting students. One of the things that we have seen consistently from our surveys is that board members are probably worrying more about things today, and a couple of things, mostly because of post-pandemic changes in enrollment, the need to move rapidly to a lot of online, how they're recovering from that, and that we see in our work of surveying board members that they have two primary concerns that come up over and over again. One is the overall wellness success of the institution, and that's things like how it finances, that's enrollment growth, that's worrying about how do they get the best match of programs to what meets the needs of their students. And the other is the actual understanding of student success. And so one of the things that we've looked at from a lot of activity from the trustees is how do they deal with some of these student success issues? Some student success students these days, there's many of them that showing that they're under more stress than they have ever been, and that it comes from multiple causes. And one of those sources of stress is financial. And in particular, one I want to talk about is the cost of course materials. We know that students worry about the cost of materials. We know that especially if you're at this conference, we know that OER is available at low or no cost and can address some of those things. We also know from our own research, as well as that of many others, is that OER materials are, in terms of faculty rate them, are actually better than commercial alternatives, the higher cost ones, and that there are ways in which you can go about this that are things that board members and trustees can have a direct impact on, that can make a massive difference in how students can use, can reach, can afford their course materials. Next slide, please. Everybody worries about student and their costs. So trustees, students, administrators, faculty. Um, we're asked the same question. The cost of education has become financially out of reach for students. Do you agree or disagree? And you can see that virtually all groups of at least 2/3 to 3/4, almost over 80%, and some have some level of agreement that that is the case. The cost of education has becoming out of reach. Trustees are up there, and in fact, are slightly more concerned than the students themselves about that in terms of, so it's a pervasive concern across all characteristics of all groups in higher education. So it's not a unique concern for trustees, but it's one where they have more control than many of the other groups. Next slide, please. And this is so we go out and we ask students, how worried are you about meeting the course material costs for this term? 18%, so this is data from Bayview Analytics study, nationally represented. We've have multiple other studies as well, but this is one that's a national study completed last year. 18% of the students responding said they're extremely worried. 26% said they're moderately worried. 37% said they're slightly worried. So 81% of all students had some level of worry. And particular subgroups are much higher. So Black students, Hispanic students, women, those who have jobs as well as Pell Grant recipients, all of those groups are actually have a higher level of worry. Only 19% of all students said they're not worried about the cost of materials. So it is something that's pervasive across students. Next slide. And all students, even those without worry, are trying to do something. 98% of every student we surveyed were trying to do something to reduce the cost of their materials. There's a sizable proportion, almost about a third, would just not buy them, not do without. Others they would buy only particular pieces. There's a significant portion in here who are doing things which would be classified as not particularly legal in terms of getting course materials that they could find online or things like that, as well as trying to see what they can do about use copies, share with classmates, things like that, or buy only a subset of the materials. So we know that even those students who are not worried about costs are taking active steps to reduce it. Next, please. And the really scary part, both for all of higher ed, but that when it's presented to those on trustees and boards, is that these just not costs in general, but the cost of course materials specifically is having a negative impact on student success as reported by the students themselves. That 38% said they got a poor grade. Now, admittedly, they may be blaming the lack of material for their lack of energy, or they didn't lack of understanding, or whatever it else is, but but we see, 34% went without course materials. The big thing is that students are worried enough about cost materials that it's changing their academic programs. They're not registering for a course. They're taking fewer courses. They are dropping courses, withdrawing, and not on this chart, but we've seen on other things, they are using the cost of the materials as choosing them not only to pick what major they're taking, because some majors have far higher costs than others, but also what school they're enrolling in. A sizable proportion of all students tell us that the cost of the course materials is determining what school they're enrolling in. And that is particularly true among those attending community college, the two-year institutions. Next slide, please. Um, so what we do know is that the faculty who use OER textbooks rate them better than the commercial alternatives. So we now have a multiple years of data from our national higher education surveys, where we ask faculty to rate what the course materials on multiple dimensions, on the cost, on accuracy, so OER materials are as good or better. They rate considerably higher on cost, obviously, but when we ask faculty for the overall quality of the course materials, those using OER textbooks give us higher ratings than those using commercials textbooks. They are also tell us when we ask, how likely are you to keep the current materials you have or to change them or to replace them with something else? Faculty using OER textbooks are the least likely to change. They're the most satisfied. They have the highest level of quality rating, and they're the least likely to think that they have a need or a drive to change. So the bottom line here is it's not cost. We're not saying, here, faculty, move to this other option. It's going to save them students some money, but it might not be as good. Actually, it's the opposite. It is cheaper, but the faculty who are using it are actually saying it's better. Next slide. So we wanted to understand, and this is pieces, what is the things that is actionable by a board member or a trustee? Board members and trustees are not part of every day-to-day operations. They don't get into the operational aspects. They worry about big picture aspects of the institution. And those big picture aspects include things like strategy and policy and budget allocations, obviously. So one of the things that we know is that as simple as publishing a policy that encourages the use of OER, doesn't mandate it, doesn't do anything else, just saying at this institution, either this department or this institution has a policy that would encourage or some other word as opposed, not necessarily demand or require. And faculty who are aware of those policies are 1.6 times as likely to adopt OER. They're even more likely to be aware of it, but 1.6. So just the act of having trustees and board members encourage or push forward on a policy that mentions OER would almost double, close to 1.6 times as likely, increase the adoption of OER at that institution based on what we're seeing in national surveys. And that, of course, then leads to far lower costs for many students and far fewer of those negative impacts. Next slide. If you actually take the next step, which is put out an initiative, meaning you're actively going out there. You didn't publish a policy and it's passive and it's available. You actually go out and publicize this, go out and put in front of faculty members, here is OER, here's what you should be doing, here's why it is better, here's the information that's available to you. Faculty are more than twice as likely to adopt the OER. And again, this is then leading them to having higher and better choices in terms of the quality of what they're doing. And therefore, we now have maybe twice as many of these courses using lower cost materials, and therefore twice as many students who are avoiding these negative impacts. Next.
Thank you, Jeff. So now I'm going to invite Dr. Lisa Petrides to the speaking, and then she's going to give us the view from a trustee.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I'm one of those 40,000 trustees that Tanya put up the slide for. So I'm Lisa Petrides, and I have two hats, but I'm here with one hat very explicitly today. One of my hats, which many of you know me from, is from the CEO of ISKME, the Institute for the Study of Knowledge Management and Education. We run OER Commons and many other OER libraries, and we do a lot of other very cool things. 4 years ago, or 5 years ago now, I had this crazy idea that we all needed to get more involved in our civic service to our country, and I ran for office. So I am a publicly elected trustee of the San Mateo County Community College District. We are in, let's see, is that the, yep, okay. hold on, Tanya, for some reason wait, hold on. No, it's showing me something else on the right. Sorry. Okay. It's showing your slides on the right instead of mine. Okay. So it's the San Mateo County Community College District. It's a 3-district campus. It serves about 30,000 students. We were recently successful in lobbying our state legislators to give us a 5-year reprieve on being able to charge students tuition. This might sound crazy, but we needed permission from the state to not charge our students $46 per unit. That has been part of a free college initiative, which is of which OER, thanks to one of their trustees. So it's interesting because I've been working in the space of OER for 20 years, but I came to as a trustee, with an educator perspective. I'm the only educator on the board. I'm also the only woman on the board. So to also verify your statistics there. And so, and it hasn't been a hard sale once I have helped to educate my own board members about the importance of an entire ecosystem for students that supports them. So free tuition is just one piece of it. I'll talk more about that, but I think it's important to realize that we have, largely because I've been on the board. So if any of you are thinking about running for public office, come talk to me. It's a little nerve-wracking. You got to have some thick skin, but it's so important because you understand how you can make these sort of micro changes in policy at this level that impact, 30,000 students, right? Where can you do that, right? So our role, and again, similar to what you saw on the slides already, we have the responsibilities to establish academic standards, to improve courses of instruction and educational programs, and to determine and control the operating and capital budgets of the district. Our mission, which we just rewrote about a year ago, and again, so I got to absolutely have a hand in this, although this particular mission now is still going through our shared governance process. But our mission is to transform futures in the communities it serves by putting students first with a focus on equity. Now, if you define equity as access, materials and content that are relevant and inclusive, not inclusive access, inclusive to them, you see how you can start to bring all of those pieces that are so important to OER. So we can't just think about OER as just this textbook replacement or just one thing about affordability. If you build it into sort of the DNA of these kinds of statements, you get to refer back to it. And when you're making your arguments and your cases for it, you can continue to go back to that. So that's been a very important part that I'm actually very proud of that we've done as a board. Now, to continue on that, so what, you say, well, where does OER fit in, right? To this mission that I just showed you everywhere. So let me give you some examples, right? It's the equity issue, but it's also the opportunity. So it's very important to know as a board, and this is the fine line here. And I was very excited to hear about the Connecticut case. But, as trustees, we don't do anything that has to do with faculty, right? Faculty get to develop the programs, they get to select their course materials. So when you advocate for OER, there's a very fine line between telling faculty that they're going to use OER. Of course, we never do that. But yet, if you take OER and broaden it as this equity issue, then you get to say, well, how are our, so the text, the slides from Jeff, our students not, I showed them that slide, my board, there was a slide like that, I think, from one of Nicole's earlier talks. And about 4 months ago, I actually brought it to my board meeting when we were having a conversation about OER and showed that to them. And they were just stunned to see the number of students that weren't buying textbooks, that were making decisions about not taking courses or dropping out of courses because they couldn't afford them. So most trustees are not thinking about this. And again, you have to look at it from the student success and the equity perspective. Okay. So we have really looked now as textbooks as an important part of all the wraparound supports that students need. That includes transportation, parking, food, and housing. We have food pantries now. We're building the first student housing in this because we got a grant from the state to do this. This is at a community college. I think there's only a small handful of community colleges in California that have student housing. But again, and this is for all of us a message, if you take OER in that bigger context, we're no longer just trying to advocate for OER in a silo, right? All the roles that we still play in OER are important, but we have to look at them more systemically. And certainly that's the perspective that's going to be compelling to a board. Also, in fact, there was a couple of great sessions yesterday around dual enrollment, looking at all of the places as a trustee. Nothing goes past me in our agenda that I don't say dual enrollment. We just made a contract with these 10 high schools. Who's paying for the course materials? Most trustees say, I'm not sure. Do we pay for them? Does the school pay for them? Is it the case? Well, you can certainly make the case to the K-12 schools who have even less money than the community colleges. At the community college level, obviously the students are bearing that burden. But when you start to have this conversation, you see how this is such an important part of the fabric of what their education is. Similarly, we have a college promise program at the state level, and we also have it at the district level, which for a certain number of students gives them basically tuition. Do you know about the college promise program? Have you heard about that? It started actually under the Obama administration. Anyway, it's a fabulous program. There's about 300 college promise programs across the country, and they essentially give students tuition, mentoring, counseling, transportation, vouchers, everything to really get them through. It's a really kind of inclusive package, so to speak. So we looked at the budget because, right, where that's fiduciary our responsibility. We look at the budget. I'm looking at all the line, and we have about 2,000 college promise students right now in our district. And lo and behold, there's an $800 per year amount for their textbooks. And I said, okay, 800 times 2,000 every year. What if that were all OER? That's money that we could be allocating from something that's already there to give teacher stipends, to have time off, to create OER, right? But you have to look at that with that kind of, and people are saying, oh, never thought about that $800 line item. It looks pretty small when you look at a budget, a very large budget of hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So it's being able to look, and again, I say this to you to be thinking about the issues that you have and what your trustees are approving, where are those places where OER is actually connected? Currently, we have this incredible opportunity in California, which you heard James talk about in the keynote yesterday with Joy, where it's $115 million. It's kind of an unprecedented amount of investment in OER. To develop across all kinds of academic and career pathways, and mostly around general education, but also around high needs areas such as nursing and in our state, firefighting and other kinds of areas like this. But so that's great. And at the same time, though, we have to look at that in the context of, like, we have a course marking requirement at the state level. So your trustees, you need to ask them, what is the implementation of those course marking efforts? Right? If we don't, often in the ability to gather data with, how many people have course marking in their institutions now? Keep your hands up. How many of those are implemented well and you actually get really good data? Yeah, that hand just went down, right? So you go to your trustees and you say, could you please, we would like to see that data on course marking. Guess what? We get to then go to the administration. Again, we don't control, like Tanya said, we don't control the administration. There's all these kinds of policies, but we get to raise this as a governance issue, and then they have to go and bring that back, and then we can make policies about how we are or aren't adhering. The transparent data collection on OER use in textbook purchasing of students, that ought to be something that you can go to your trustees for and ask for. I've now become good friends with our IR office. I think when I got there, they were like, oh my God, Trustee Petrides keeps wanting us to bring the data. Now they come preemptively with data. It's fabulous. Like you can do this. But you have to ask and you have to think to ask, right? And then one that, of course, and if you saw Nicole Allen's talk this morning around inclusive access, you have to ensure that those investments that your institution has been making in OER aren't being undermined by any kind of automatic textbook billing policies. And I think she said it better than I could. If you didn't see her talk this morning, I highly recommend going back and looking at the slides. I think they're recorded too. Yeah. And then this last one is about educating other trustees about the affordances of OER. I feel like I've done that very successfully with my board. Now I go to state level meetings and I'm always the one at the networking, party. If everybody's drinking cocktails, I always just have a Coke. So I'm completely, on it and I can get them to be thinking a little more loosely. And I'm talking to them about OER and they know nothing. They've never heard of the term OER. I can tell you about like 85% of the trustees I talk to these are like California Community College trustees have never heard of OER before. When you start talking about this, oh, I heard something about that. I know that. And then I start asking them, where in your budget have you done? I kind of go through this. And so this is something that I have been trying to do as well. I can also point out the Michelson Foundation, who's been very supportive of this. They egg me on to go to our state chancellor, to our board of governors meetings, and to write op-ed pieces. Like it helps to kind of have a community that supports that. And we're trying to grow that still. So we need to talk to the AGB about this as well, because I don't think that AGB has had any kind of session yet. And this is why people like Tanya, we need to make sure we place people in these kinds of agencies so we can start to educate on what these issues are. I want to say why you shouldn't be afraid to approach your board. Some of you I know have gone through the AAC and use the Institute on IOER, and I've been a mentor there since the beginning, or a faculty mentor. And one thing that I always advocate for the cohorts is, have you approached your board? What do they know about this work? And sometimes they're like, great idea, we're going to do it. And sometimes they say, oh, we've been trying, we can't get through, our provost is blocking it. We're not sure how to do it. If you have a publicly elected board, they must make space for public comments and concerns. So you have every right, no matter who you are in that institution, to go to those boards, to get on the agenda, or not, if you're not even on the agenda, to make public comments in those areas. Trustees do understand that students are the primary stakeholders and that they're there to serve them. I have seen that across the board, not just, in my district, and not just even in California community colleges. Trustees get that most of the trustees, I mean, I don't know, I'd love to see, I don't know if Jeff, if you have this data yet, but I'd love to see how many trustees are educators or who come from an educator background. There's not a lot of us, and that's fine. We shouldn't have a bunch of educators all on a board. You need a good spectrum of expertise, but most of these trustees come from the business world. They're people who've been serving their communities in various ways. They went to college. They think that's their experience that they have, and their expertise around how you run a college. So it's really important that we, but at the same time, I'm sorry, what I was going to say is that they do understand at the core that their job is around serving students. So that is the appeal that I think that you can make. And then the other thing, if those channels for communication are really blocked, then you can find out about how to agendize, they call it, the topic for a board meeting. And it might be going through something through libraries. It might be going through student success. If you're still allowed to talk about DEI in your state, it might be because you go through the DEI or Equity Center. Just think of these different avenues that you can go through to actually get to the trustees. I think that's my last slide. So I hope I've inspired you to talk to your trustees. I also want to just say, if there's anything that if I ever can do to help you, if you want to go to your board of trustees, I'm always there. I've become a complete advocate to help people do that, and also a plug to run for office for your local boards of trustees. Thank you.
So exciting. Okay, so a surprise. I was in Nicole Allen's session and she mentioned Nicholas Simon, and he's here, and he did this. So this is a little impromptu, and he was kind enough to oblige us, but I'd love for him to just tell you what they've accomplished in Connecticut. Can you come and tell your story? Thank you.
So thank you very much. So concretely, I'm from Connecticut. I work at Eastern Connecticut State University. We are a part of a system, 12 community colleges, 4 state university, 1 online education college. We have a chancellor of our system, and we have a board of regent. Our chancellor had a great idea to implement automatic textbook billing in September 2024. However, the chancellor asked Barnes and Noble to create a great presentation to say how great it was and share the presentation to the member of the board of regent. And in a small committee, a board submitted a resolution to implement that, and it was submitted for a vote at a regular board meeting. So we were informed about that in February 2024, and we started to fight against it. So we contacted the regent to inform them about the fact that maybe it was a bad idea. The students started a petition, and tomorrow you have Jennifer Cronwell will be at the students panel tomorrow. I highly invite you to go hear the students talk. The union get involved. AUP signed a resolution. We contacted local politicians in the state of Connecticut, especially the member of the higher ed committee, the 2 state senators, the governor, the Department of Education, because Cordona is from Connecticut, and the White House. The White House didn't respond to us. I really don't know why, because anyway. And concretely, during the meeting, the regent changed their mind. At first, they were supporting automatic textbook billing, and with all the thing which happened before the meeting, they started to question what the chancellor was trying to ask them to sign on. And during the meeting, a regent say, wait a second, you ask us to sign something, but we didn't see the contract and we don't know exactly everything which will happen. What is happening here? You had the student regent, so college students who are a part of the board of regent, who before the meeting, contacted some students at University of Connecticut, which implemented automatic textbook billing. And the students at University of Connecticut were surprised and say, what? We are paying for the textbook? It's our tuition? They didn't even know. So the student in the board of regent in our system said, hey, we refused it. So the regent basically rejected the idea of the chancellor of our system. What I learned from this experience is it's never too early to go talk with your regent, to go talk with your trustee, to create a relationship, to say, hey, we exist, we are involved with some specific thing in education, we believe in open educational resources. So that's the first step. Bring data. Data, and more data. It will take you some time to collect the data, to analyze the data. But the thing is, it's a data war. If your administrator want to implement automatic textbook billing, they will have data from the publisher. And guess what? The publisher will say, it's great. Of course, they will make lots of money if it's implemented. So our job as OER advocate, as OER activist, is to have lots of data and to share this data to show to everyone, including the regent, including the trustee, that OER is the future for higher education. You're welcome.
So he did that without being told. He just So thank you so much, Nicholas. I appreciate it so much. Okay, now, did you think about your questions? What would you like the regents to know? Are there any in the chat? Or any Q&A? Do you have any Q&A too?
I do have one in the chat.
Okay.
Someone asked about the secret sauce question. How do you develop an elevator pitch to answer the question? Why give away the secret sauce?
How do you,
This is referring, I think, earlier in the
oh,
presentation.
I don't know. Why give away the secret sauce? I don't know. I might have to think about that one. There's another question in the back of the room. I've got one more. Okay, here. Can you say it and I'll repeat your question, sir? Okay.
How did you fund the 5 years of free tuition for San Mateo? Maybe that's confidential, but um, um, because everything costs something. And so how did you, there must be a fund for that. I mean, you can't just, I mean, I don't think you can just have arrangement with the state. I mean, everything costs something.
That's right. Absolutely. And again, remembering that our job is to look across all of the budgets, right? It helps that we are a basic aid state. And so the way we get money is from our tax base, and we live in a community where there's very expensive real estate. We have higher taxes. But we didn't just have cash to put, it was basically that the first year was about $6.5 million. We are looking holistically across the budget. So for example, we had a athletic center that was run by a corporate entity. And the year before, we had worked to bring this internally so that we could not have to pay these prices that commercial entities charge, as well as be able to give all of the jobs of maintaining to our unions that already we employ at the district. And so there was savings from that. So you're, in other words, you're looking, I'm just using that as an example to say, you look and see very carefully. If you say student equity is the most important thing first, how do we serve students? You look for places across the budget where you can bring something in and trim something from that. At the same time, we're also, I didn't mention this, but we are kind of re-energizing and restructuring our foundation, our district foundation, and have gone out to the community to have these conversations now. So for example, our Board of Supervisors, which is sort of our local kind of below the state level in our county, they gave us $2 million to this effort, right? Because they saw what we were doing, they saw how it was impacting the, the economic, viability of being able to educate young people in our community, not just young people, but re-educate people in our community to have jobs there locally that helped the whole, economic viability of the region itself. So that's a very complicated answer to your question, but the point is you have to look at the whole thing across the board and you start making priorities. Right. But it's not that you you have to take it from somewhere to bring it somewhere else.
But the giving is the main component. The giving, like the $2 million that you received.
That certainly helped. That certainly helped.
Thank you.
First, I want to thank you for your
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to thank you for the presentation. I do have a question though that sort of revolves around the idea of, yes, we put students first as terms of an equity focus, but then we also as educators are constantly being abused. And I use that word very strongly because we're asked to do things from our heart. And so we don't get funded, we don't get support, we don't get the things that we need to be able to make this reality, something that we believe in, materialize. And I just would like to point to California, for example, where I work within the CSU system. We had a 6% increase to our students' tuition. And at the same time, we have a compact with the governor that requires us to reduce educational costs by 50% by 2025. So these things seem juxtaposed, and who has to do the work are the educators, and we will, and we do, but often without much support. And I'm just curious as to how we can make the equity sort of issue, and an issue for all, not just for our students, but also for the educators who are there trying to support the students and make their reality, come true with opportunities to learn and to succeed. So
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. Well said. And we, in the initiatives that I've led at the state and system and compact level, we've always had some sort of stipend or some sort of grant programs for faculty. I'm not an expert in what's happening in California, but the basic premise that people should be paid for their labor is foundational to open educational resources and the movement that we're accomplishing here. So we agree with you, and maybe we need to think of the way to do it in your neighborhood.
So to
Okay.
kind of follow up on that and to add to the question that you asked of what I would want my board to know is that 90% of our students show a financial need on our textbook surveys, that they need the textbook costs to come down. So this is not, so only the top 10% of our students are the ones who are not in this boat. And so they need to recognize that this is the everyday student. This is not just the minority. This is not just those who are on Pell Grant. This is your everyday student who is coming into your class who needs this help. And to support the return on investment, I can show you even in just small classes, I can get your return on investment in just 1 year. Every time that's used, that return on investment is multiplied. This is a one-to-many application of your investment funds, not a one-to-one application. And that also multiplies each semester that this is put in place. And that's where we can get these savings to get those reduced costs and to bring our stress down for our students and to bring them to success.
Beautiful. Can you state your name and your location again?
Sorry, Rebel Cummings Solace with Florida Virtual Campus.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to tie those two comments together too from both of you. It's interesting in California right now, we have $115 million and only 48 million of that has been actually spent and allocated. So there's still time for faculty to come together to actually receive money to their districts, to their colleges for OER. But let me say something else, which is that I think often these systems of higher education, and California is no different than others, we have competing stakeholder groups. And we have to make sure, and this is something that I try to finesse as a trustee, and say, you can't just say it's students versus faculty. And often that kind of comes because the faculty might say, well, if you're doing that for students, then you can afford to give us a raise if you're giving students free tuition. And I think we don't ever want to be in that position. We have to actually we should have students and faculty working together and having these conversations. For example, with our investment in those tuition dollars for our free college initiative, which by the way is the first one in the state, and there's another districts that just started. We're kind of excited. By the way, in California, free community colleges was the norm 40 years ago. So we're trying to get back that way. But we have right now, if you look at the community college enrollments, there's been a severe decline of -4%, what I think was like the median. I think there's, maybe 2 to 4% is the average. And we had a 12% enrollment growth this past year due to our free college initiative. So you say there's more students, that means there's more money. But we had to make the investment to get those students there. So it's a complex ecosystem of many things that are being balanced, and they're being balanced with the economic situation in the region, by the pandemic, by many things. But we have to work together in this way to look at that, because the way I've seen these things not work is when they're pitted, and when we have one group saying we're the most important and the other group just dropping out. Right.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you.
I think we're at time. We have 1 minute.
Can I ask one more question from the
Yes.
chat? Someone raised the concern that what if they might fear retaliation from administrators if they bring issues to the board. Do you have any advice for that?
I would say work with your administrators as well. So I would never recommend somebody put themselves in a position where they have retaliation from an administrator or fear their jobs or something like that. So as much as you can work with people and find commonality and work together on issues that matter to everyone, the better. Thank you so much. This is not an easy issue. It's a brand new topic for open ed, so thank you for bearing with us. I'm sure there will be more, and we invite continued conversation. Thank you so much for attending. We appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your time at the Open Ed conference.